What's up, learning enthusiasts? Professor Leis here. I want to take some time to explain how you should go about choosing the TED Talk that you're going to analyze in major essay project number 1. I know it can be a little daunting, and I just want to keep a couple of things in mind for us to make your job not necessarily easier, but more meaningful and hopefully a little less stressful. So let's go ahead and take a look at some things to keep in mind. So first of all, remember your objective, okay? So keep in mind what the prompt is asking you to do, all right? So the purpose of major essay project number 1 is to examine a speaker's rhetorical choices, not to weigh in on their perspective on the issue. You are not necessarily focusing on the content of the speaker's talk. You are analyzing how well they got their point across. Whether or not you agree with their message is irrelevant and shouldn't have a presence in your essay. So keep in mind what rhetoric is. As we've learned from our course, rhetoric is the means or methods by which a message or an argument is conveyed, the way something is expressed or put across. Right? It's not necessarily the content, the message itself, it's the vehicle that moves or transports the message, right? So how something is done, not what the thing is that is being done, if that makes sense. So return to that what is rhetoric lecture, right? Return to those concepts, what we were learning from that lecture. That will help you. And then additionally, go back to chapter 1 from Everything's an Argument, understanding arguments and reading them critically. And additionally, chapter 6, rhetorical analysis. Those can be really helpful for you. So return to your notes, return to your reading response questions, get that stuff fresh in your mind, because that can help you with this project here. So my suggestion when going about choosing a TED Talk itself is I think it's a really smart idea to choose a TED Talk that you enjoy watching. Your experience working on this essay will likely be more enjoyable in that case. It will also be easier to focus on the speaker's rhetorical choices and not on their argument or perspective itself. So going into your selection, going into choosing the TED Talk, don't choose a TED Talk that you disagree with. That's really my suggestion. And the reason for that is because typically what happens in that case is we want to prove that person wrong. We want to weigh in on the scenario. We want to say, that's not right. I disagree with you, and here's why I disagree with you. But remember our objective. We're not trying to weigh in on the issue itself. We're trying to examine how rhetoric and the speaker's rhetorical choices, the way they get their message across, is either effective or ineffective. Now, in most cases, when you enjoy the TED Talk that you're watching, and this has been the case from my previous classes over the semesters, it just goes much more effectively for you. It's less stressful because, one, you enjoy the TED Talk, so that's one thing. You can kind of just put that aside, like, okay, I enjoy watching this. But two, it's gonna be a little easier to temper that impulse to jump in on the scenario and try to prove somebody wrong or try to prove that we're right about something. So let's bring in some wisdom from Star Wars here. Great kid, don't get cocky. Those of you familiar with Star Wars might recognize that from Han Solo talking to Luke Skywalker. So keep that in mind. Rather than trying to show your readers what you already know about something, try to show your readers how you came to greater understanding. So in other words, don't let the impulse to prove somebody wrong interfere with your learning. So remember, our objective is to examine how a speaker's rhetorical choices work or don't work. If you enjoy the talk, chances are you're looking at how they do work, and I think that will be a little it'll be easier for you, so just keep that in mind. But also just kind of not getting in our own way here. Because if we start to try to weigh in, if we start to let our ego get in, get in our way and we're trying to prove the speaker wrong, then chances are we're going off topic. We're not addressing what the prompt is asking us to do, and we want to avoid that, right? So just keep that in mind, okay? So I have here the list of TED Talks. You can find this on the prompt, of course, but let's take a look here. So I would just want to give you all a little rundown of what each TED Talk focuses on to kind of help you out a little bit. So this first one by Ron Finley, he's an artist and a prominent guerrilla gardener. And so what his whole talk is about is how he has sort of led this movement in his community in South Central LA of creating what are called guerrilla gardens, meaning they find vacant lots or the parkways along sidewalks that are not being used, and they use them to plant gardens, community gardens for people to work in and enjoy the bounty of that. And so he's really expressing his enthusiasm for that and how people can get involved and the effects of that. Now the next one by the speaker Majora Carter is called Greening the Ghetto, and this has a very similar spirit to Ron Finley's, but it's a little different. And so her whole premise is how the lack of green spaces in urban environments is detrimental to the people who live in those communities, right? And so she is trying to encourage people to really invest in communities by creating more green spaces, because it's just healthier for people generally to be in those green spaces. So Sal Khan, many of you might recognize him from Khan Academy. He's the founder of Khan Academy. I'm sure many of you have used at least one of those videos on YouTube to learn some sort of math formula or some sort of concept in a class that you're struggling with. And so his talk, Let's Teach for Mastery, Not Test Scores, is really his whole philosophy on education, that we shouldn't be trying to train students to be able to perform well on tests. We should be focusing on encouraging and cultivating students to be able to master things before they move on to the next level, and also to find the sort of aptitudes that they have. So he has a new way of looking at education, which is really compelling and interesting. So if you've ever used a Sal Khan video, a Khan Academy video, that might be one to check out. This next one is by a guy named Trevor Reagan. And for lack of a better word, he is a motivational speaker. And so his talk, How to Overcome Fear, is centered on this idea of how we can use what he calls the lizard brain, or he didn't term that phrase, but he uses that phrase, the lizard brain. How can we work with that in order to use fear in a positive way to help us live our lives more meaningfully? And so if you're interested in that type of thing, I think that would be a really interesting TED Talk to check out. The next one is by a writer named Roxane Gay, and her speech is called Confessions of a Bad Feminist, and it's based off of an essay she wrote called Bad Feminist, and she identifies as what she calls a bad feminist because she doesn't fit the mold of what people think a feminist should be. A lot of people have misconceptions on what feminism is. There's a lot of negative connotations, and she's trying to really express what her notions of feminism are through this, what she calls a bad feminist. And so if any of you are interested in that, that is a great talk to observe, to check out. The next one's by another writer and kind of public thinker, Adam Grant. And his talk is called The Surprising Habits of Original Thinkers. And his whole premise is that original thinkers, they tend to be people who procrastinate or kind of do things a little differently than what we would think should be the case for people who are, geniuses, for, to use that term. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, like what is original thinking? How can we be innovative in the things that we do in our careers and to try to push things forward in new and interesting ways? That's a really good talk to check out. Next one by Zachary R. Wood is entitled Why It's Worth Listening to People You Disagree With. And this is a particularly interesting talk, and I think it's very relevant to our current kind of the zeitgeist of the United States right now. We tend to think of people very polarized and unwilling to listen to opposing viewpoints, and we tend to get agitated and confrontational and angry. And so he is stressing the importance of speaking and listening across aisles and not necessarily rejecting viewpoints that you disagree with just because you disagree with them, but rather it's important to listen to those opposing viewpoints, because ultimately that's how we become more confident and sure of our own opinions and viewpoints, right? If we know what our viewpoints aren't, we can definitely know what they are. So that's a really interesting TED Talk. I recommend checking that out if that strikes you as interesting. The next one is by Greta Thunberg. Many of you have probably heard of her. She's the young Swedish climate activist. Every Friday for the past few years, she's been doing what she calls school strike for climate. So she strikes. She doesn't go to school every Friday. She strikes in front of the different public places, trying to get people to take climate change seriously. So her case is the disarming case attack right now on climate change. And so if that is an issue that is compelling to you, definitely check that one out. And the final one is by the economist Kate Raworth, and her talk is entitled "A Healthy Economy Should Be Designed to Thrive, Not Grow." And Kate Raworth is credited for developing a concept in economics called donut economics, and she has a different view of how we should be thinking about the economy and business and things of that nature. So if you're interested in going into economics, if you're an economics major or a business major, or you just care about those things, that would be a really compelling or interesting talk to check out. So when you're going through, if there's a few of those, you're like, oh, I don't know, that one could be cool, that one could be cool, maybe I'll try that one. What I recommend that you do is just do a little skimming of each of the talks. So click on the link, and it will take you to the talk itself, and you can go ahead and just begin watching it. And then if after a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, it's not really that interesting to you, instead of just clicking away, maybe click to the center of the video, kind of check it out, watch a couple more minutes there, and then maybe come to some sort of conclusion. But then go back to the others that strike you as interesting and kind of do that same skimming through. Again, don't choose a talk that you don't like. Don't choose a talk that you don't enjoy watching. And I really strongly recommend that you don't choose a talk where you're fervently in opposition to the speaker's perspective, because again, that's going to make your job much more difficult, trying to focus on the rhetorical choices of the speech versus the content or message of the speech. We're not looking at the message itself, we're looking at the way the message is conveyed. All right, y'all. Well, if you have any questions, please reach out to me via Canvas. I'm happy to talk with you more, address any questions that you have, and we'll go from there. All right, everyone, have fun.